metaphors. They're all symbols and metaphors for humanity, but in reality they're the opposite. I like the tree they have out front, and it's, by the way, it's not a real tree, it's a bronze tree. It talks about dedicating to the addiction problems and the drug addicts of the world, and it's curable. When they fully well know that the addiction problem is inside there and it's power. It's greed, and they're disconnected from anything around. It's all hijacked. It's all hijacked. The original charter through the Atlantic Conference, what it was supposed to be, it's completely flipped. No royals. It was supposed to be about the levelers, and it's not the levelers. It's not about human rights anymore. There's elements of it, and there's still people that try, but the nuclear took the field. The nuclear runs this whole place. The IAEA runs the UN. They own the UN. The World Health Organization is the IAEA. It's the nuclear cartel. They run the world. And they run it right out of this place. They have all the money, they have all the power, because it's still, the Cold War never stopped. I call it plutonium wars. The Cold War never stopped. We had a chance. We had a real chance with Gorbachev, and believe it or not, of all people, Reagan. It wasn't Reagan per se, the American populace. American populace stood up against nuclear big time in the early 80s. That was the capitulation to the anti-nuclear movement. It was 1982-3. And I mean, it was over. Nuclear was over. They signed the international treaty. They signed the international treaty not to stop making, but get rid. Gorbachev's the greatest anti-nuclear activist that ever lived. People can argue with me on that, but what he did is amazing. Through here, through the UN. And the U.S. populace forced Reagan's hand. Of course, we know what they did to Gorbachev. We know what Putin's up to. The same thing that Obama and Clinton's and Bush's. They're the puppets for the nuclear cartel. They're nothing but their puppets, and they push those guys, that mentality, to the margins. It's over. So how did they do it? You know, Chernobyl happens in '86. That should have been the end. That's when the IAEA, which they already captured the UN in '59, the World Health Organization. They took it. They captured it. And so that's when the pro-nuclear PR machine was really born in earnest, was the cover-up of Chernobyl. So you'd think it would go the other way, and it didn't go the other way. It went, everybody became pro-nuclear. How is that possible? You know, I met a woman yesterday here. We went and had lunch. She lived here in Austria, and she had 4 young children when Chernobyl happened. And we call it in Utah, we call it the Utah smiley face, which is because of the open air test in Nevada, we all grew up, and there's hundreds of thousands of women in that region that have that scar cut their thyroid out. She had the biggest one I ever seen. We call it the Chernobyl necklace. She had the biggest one. She says, '88 I developed thyroid cancer. All my friends developed thyroid cancer here in Austria. So the doctor cut it out, then more, cut it out more, cut it out more. She says, and all my friends, you know, she was a 30-year-old woman, all my friends, she's a big group of friends. Same thing, they all died. You know, it starts at the thyroid, and so these guys went to work with their money. You know, and they think it's all about bombs. It's all about money. It's not magic. It's not a pellet. They tricked us all that it was this magic. It's boilers. It's primitive. It's primitive. They take the world's water and just boil it with uranium mines. But the economic model, it's the most expensive, outrageous, ridiculous energy source. I'm an economist. I mean, I broke down this stuff for everything. I taught the #1 school business in the world. I broke this down years ago. They use more electricity in a nuclear power plant than they produce. How's that possible? Cost analysis. Any basic accountant can do cost analysis. Well, how's that possible? Very simple how possible it is. 2 documents. 1. The document that was signed in 1959 Oh, the Russian, the Cold War, you know. The United States was able to convince the nuclear industry that Russia was the true big enemy. And so the UN turned the UN over to the IAEA. The documents are there, and the World Health Organization. Everything had to go through them. Without the World Health Organization and what they were chartered to do, we have nothing. They hijacked it, so everything has to filter through the IAEA before the World Health Organization. They own it. They own the entire UN. So then we have a thing in the United States called Price-Anderson. It was passed in the 1950s, a congressional act that says, economically, number one, they take no risk. So if there's any kind of accident, the taxpayer pays, which at 3 Mile Island, the people who lived in a 5-mile radius got a check for a couple $1 million. The taxpayer paid it. Nobody even knows that, but not only that, the American taxpayer has to pay to build them. They have to buy the energy back from them. They have to maintain them, all the way A to Z. And I will bet you that, and I don't know this for a fact because nobody knows it, because nobody's seen the TPP. But my guess is the documents in the TPP, and the reason they're secret, Keith, and you can read them, they're full of paper. There's no doubt in my mind they're nuclear, 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 because it's the great cash cow. Hillary, Westinghouse, Clinton. Bill Clinton strikes the deal in Kazakhstan. He gets a bribe by the president, and then the president donates $30, $40 million to Bill Clinton's so-called foundation. Well, what's that all about? It's about Bill Clinton's greed. You know, he goes on the public state's greed. And then Hillary goes to Czechoslovakia right here. Her last duty is Secretary of State. You can look it up. Threatens the president of Czechoslovakia. You break the contract with the Russian firms. Westinghouse, 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 Westinghouse. Which Toshiba bought Westinghouse. But yet Westinghouse still remains the board of directors. How is that possible? That's against international law. That's against the United States law. It's just to get cover at Fukushima, Japan. It's to get legal cover through the UN at Fukushima, Japan. That's all it is. But now it even gets worse because of here. So it's anything that comes up, they now can say, because of the global war on terrorism and never-ending war, which there are plenty of people that fought back here inside the UN, but the United States bought them off. So they can say now it's just the global terrorism. So what's going on in the Ukraine right now? I mean, there's a full-blown out war going there. People are ignorant about this war. The United States has CIA in there. And the United States admits it. Putin's saber rattling, you know, his missiles, it's a very, very dangerous thing. Very dangerous thing. And the American populace is so ignorant about it. They don't know anything. They don't even know, they couldn't tell you. It's like somebody asked me, why don't people travel to Austria? Because they really do think it's Australia. That's how geographically ignorant they are. But so when you start talking Ukraine and there's a war going on, I mean, that's a vast, vast, big piece of real estate with a lot of uranium, a lot of nuclear waste, and Putin doesn't want to get, well, the Russians don't want to get, the rest of the world, the American, what is even American, the colonials have got it. The United States has turned into nothing but the Royals' military colony. They don't even have to have a military in England no more, the House of Windsor, the Royals. They have the United States. And so they've colonialized the world. And they're doing it through nuclear. And they do it through nuclear on twofold. One, the money. But it's bigger than that. If you have nuclear reactors, and if nuclear reactors take a byproduct called nuclear waste, which that's how we make nuclear bombs. So it's very dangerous. They have no answer for it, so they strategically place it right there. For instance, in the Ukraine, when we caught that mushroom cloud going up, there's malicious dumps full of spent fuel. So when they strike them and blow up, that's a nuclear bomb. So they don't need to drop a bomb. They have 410 of them spread around the world. And you're forced to buy the waste through the UN Charter, through Price-Anderson. So legally they can do it. And they do it through the fear in the populace. But so I've been protesting here, you know, I was an anti-nuclear my whole life growing up in Utah. Was raised some of the best anti-nuclear activists in the world because we were American Ground Zero. We were American Ground Zero because of the 350 open-air tests in Nevada. And Utahns were very socially conscious. And, you know, they were all European immigrants, by the way, including my family. My grandfather came from here, right here. And they were very socially conscious about the environment. And they were pissed. Everybody was dying of cancer. So all the great activists came to Utah. Well, that's who raised me. You know, Stegner, Abby, Madeline Rice, all of them. They were there, and they were intense, and they were smart, and they were articulate. They just didn't have unbridled passion. They knew their subject matter, and they accomplished a lot. So I grew up with that, but they brainwashed everybody into fear. Oh, we need nuclear energy, when we don't even use nuclear energy. 48 reactors offline in Japan for how long now? Over 4 years, not one single rolling blackout. Is that possible? Not from what they'll tell you. They told us that the United States, or excuse me, Japan, made up 72% of the grid was nuclear. Not one rolling blackout. Not one rolling blackout. We got San Onofre shut down in California. They said it made 12% of the grid. Hottest summer in a row, 3 summers in a row. You see any rolling blackouts? No, because we don't use it. Technology passed it. So my father, born and raised Utah, amazing guy, he was drafted into the Korean War, you know, in the Marines. So he's at Pendleton. Well, in the middle of the night, they had those guys combat ready for Korea. He was the very, very first group. The original Special Forces guys. They'd done evaluation tests on all those guys, and they took him, trucked him in the middle of the night to the Nevada test site. Not the ones you see in the support crew, which, by the way, that's my lawsuits that got those exposed through the Freedom of Information Act. 60,000 Army personnel, but 40,000. My dad was the very first group. They put him right next to the bomb, and it was an experiment. And it wasn't Operation Plum, and it was already saying it was a secret experiment done through Berkeley, Livermore, Teller, the Hungarian right here, who was running the field. So they blew him up. He said before his death, you could see his bones flash from his eyes. I mean, it killed a lot of them right at the blast. They immediately had filled hospitals set up there. They cut their tonsils out. All of them. They cut their tonsils out immediately in the field hospital, put them in jars. They still have the tonsils at Berkeley. So then they woke up in hospitals in San Diego, and nobody had heard from him. My grandma says she hadn't heard from months. They thought he'd probably been killed in Korea. You know, but my grandma, we had connections through, you know, a lot of powerful people came from our town in Washington, and she made calls, and she got to the bottom of it. And so he came home, and he was a mess, just torn to smear. I mean, just a mess. And he got better. He was an incredible, healthy guy, but I mean, the prime of his life. Like she says, this is a guy who never had a cavity, never had a cold. He got leukemia one day. Boom, dead. And so there's 300,000 of us, the children of the atomic veterans. Now, and it's my work that's proved all this. My work is proving in my PhD in the 90s that now we're getting leukemia, the children, via the atomic veterans, after we were conceived, after they came home, they got married, had families. You know, I was born very autistic. I had a twin sister of all things, which we know that's a mutation. You know, we were preemies, we were autistic, we had lung problems, we had all these problems that come from the atomic veterans we know now. And so I'm going on about Fukushima. When Fukushima happened, I was a social activist. I was working with the group that started Occupy. I was at NYU, called Post Ignorance, leading up to the shirtwaist fire. 100th anniversary of that was March 25th, 2011. Well, 2 weeks before that, Fukushima happened. So I went crazy on my YouTube site and never looked back, but I'm like, it's going to give you leukemia in California, in the western United States. The plumes flying over. This is nobody would believe me it was full blown out. Nobody on earth. Anybody could say they do. Look it up. Proof, proof, proof. I'm the only one. It took me a year. So 7 months later, I got a stomach ache. Right as I was due to speak at Zuccotti that day. Thought it was food poisoning. And here I've been writing about this, whatever, and in my knowledge, you know, Leukemia-conforming tumor, especially in the lower right testicular man, it's called de novo. It's almost always a death sentence. Misdiagnosed, I went from 170 to 130 in 3 weeks. And finally, I come from a family of doctors, but an old doctor named Vincent Hansen, who know me, whose brother and father both died in Utah of thyroid cancer, the great oncologist, finally, after they wanted to cut me open, they misdiagnosed me, told me it was cancer, sent me home to die. Finally, I found a YouTube video. The pathologist had it wrong. I found a YouTube video with 14 views that talked about a pathologist talking about the lower right mesentery through pathology cancer tumors. He felt that they got him wrong more than got him right. So I got in to see Vincent, and he says, "Boy, I'm glad you didn't have that surgery. I'm glad you didn't listen. I was dying." So he laid me down, went in my hip, bone marrow biopsied me, and he believed in me. He loved me and he cared about me. Danish philosophy doctor, and sent me to a bone marrow transplant at LDS Hospital, which is a guy named Fimbo Peterson from Copenhagen, who started this Danish philosophy hospital, and I was a red 10. That's how they rate you. I'm the only red 10 to ever walk up, and I did it without a bone marrow transplant, but my activism saved my life. And so they went in and they cared about me, and they put a central line in me, and they didn't just do it with chemo. You know, they did it with food, that, you know, because I couldn't eat, walking, hiking, the good fight, the fight. So there's 300,000 of us children, and we're getting leukemia now, and we're dying. The same thing that goes here. The same thing here. The men of Chernobyl, there was this, I cannot overstate this. 580,000 men were drafted. I know people, the girl that I was involved with for years is one of the original Femen girls, before it was Femen, that would go into Chernobyl and take their clothes off, and she were the first Eastern Europeans that were able to go to the United States. That's how I met her. And anti-nuclear, I was anti-nuclear. So, and they're all dying. By the way, she died of leukemia in '99, and they were all dying, but we know the 580,000 men that were sent into Chernobyl were drafted. She told me both her uncles, they came to the door and just took her uncles. You know, they were 18, 19-year-old men. Now they're kids. The children of the 580,000 men in Chernobyl that entombed Chernobyl are now their children genetically, because they used a lot of young men, and a lot of them died, but the ones they had families, and now their kids are getting leukemia in their 40s and 50s and driving, and there are probably well over 500,000 of them in that part of the world, in this part of the world. And then there's 300,000 of us, and nobody will speak up for us, nobody will say a word for us, no one cares. No, I've never seen one person. I've been at every symposium, I protest all over the world, all these so-called established anti-nuclears. They won't say a word about the Nevada test site. My dad never got a medal. He never got nothing. We have a plaque put up at the cemetery that we did for our community. It's the only one in the world. So they died unknown. They didn't get any money. They erased all their data. They supposedly had a fire. So they just tried to erase them from humanity. And they're trying to erase their children from humanity through these guys. Because it's all about the lies. It's all about the greed. It's all about the money. It's a power addiction. They have all the money. So it's really to threaten other people and control the world. And the United States was able to, and it's not just the United States, it's the globalist, which is run out of the United States by the United States military, and they've got the American populace in so fear. When we grew up, we were taught to hate Eastern Europeans. All of them hate their guys. We never seen one. We never saw one. It was against the law to come here. It was against the law. And we were taught that they were these hideous, horrible people. They just pounded us. You know, of course, I didn't believe it. A lot of people didn't believe it. And then when they started to show up, we're like, wow. And we started to hear these stories of Chernobyl, these beautiful, beautiful women telling us these heartbreaking stories of Chernobyl. And like, oh my God. Same thing in Utah. So now we're in denial, so it's all about fear. And it's all about, oh, you know, the Russians are going to get us, the United States is going to get us, and the rest of the world's caught in between. But it's all about their greed. So I've been here protesting every day at the IAEA. And I protest all over, everywhere, since I've got cancer. And that's what I do, you know, and I try to, my role as an activist, I want to be an effective activist. I want to make change. I'm a human rights activist. The ultimate violation to human rights is nuclear. It violates everything. It violates economics. It violates religion. It violates spirituality. It violates the birds, the animals, every piece of DNA. It is the most illogical, vile thing in human history. It kills more people than any plague. They're going to get rid of them, so we got to get on them. So you say they're finally going to get rid of them in 2017?
Yeah, that's what they say, but some
are going to stay?
Maybe.
I got to ride them.
Stadiongasse. Umsteigen zu 2 in Richtung WATERLOO, Erdbrustgasse.
I like this.
So after this stop is our look at the garden.
Dr. Karl Heinrich. Umsteigen zu U3. 46, 49, 48a.
They'll be calling you a radical. I think this is a historic place and a time to be here. They're reporting on the new Waterloo here on the fight. This is the palace. Marie Antoinette to Marie Antoinette. Let them eat yellow cake. This is where she lived. This is their birthplace. That young girl, the last Roman. The last real Roman Empire. Well, till now they're right here. They've just moved right there. The UN sets up there. But I want to talk about this. Today is exactly 200 years from Waterloo. Waterloo is exactly and I want to talk about this in historical tense, about the Prussian-Hungarian War. When Yalta by the Sea 70 years ago right now, Stalin, FDR, Churchill was out, the famous quote. I gotta tell you, Franklin, everything you say, you're gonna take out of the rose flies in the face of Mother England and her cousins and all her friends. But I have to go along with you. If I don't go along with you, old England is done. They will go the way of Marie Antoinette. They will go the way of the rest of them. Heads chopped off. So they played long ball. FDR drops dead. April 12th, 1945, as they're dividing up. When I was a kid, you wouldn't have believed these Eastern Bloc babies. We never saw a person from Russia. We never saw a person from Hungary, from Czechoslovakia, never in our lives. Never once in our life. We didn't get to see one. They weren't allowed in the United States. We weren't allowed there. And the bootleg propaganda they shoved down our throat was so disgusting. So they find Teller. Oppenheimer, the peace activist. Einstein, the peace activist. So Teller was Hungarian. Hello. That war, oh, do they hate the Russians. By the way, it's an irony that 200 years, you think it's coincidence that the globalists, it's Flag Day in Russia, the same day. It's 200 years exactly today of Waterloo. So Marie Antoinette's a little girl right here. She's a young girl living in this incredible place, the Hungarian Empire's daughter. The arranged marriage in France. You know, he couldn't even get a hard on. They sit there and watch and tried to watch him consummate it. He couldn't do it. He was not. So that bloody battle that day changed the whole dynamic of the world. So they find Teller in 45. He said at the end, clear into the... I just came from the UN, and it was being debated inside there today on the weaponry in space. They're fighting over who's going to be on the council. The Arabs are fighting, and the Americans and Jews, of course, together fighting Israel. They're together. They can't get anything done. They're fighting who's going to be on the council. Now you think about this. Think about this. But the UN is here. The UN's at this palace. This is the National Archives. This incredible place. And by the way, Marie Antoinette never said let them eat yellow cake. She took the fall. I think it's very similar to Marie Antoinette. Of course, he did say let them eat yellow cake. And they're puppet, they're handlers, but she was a little girl. He's a grown fucking man with no balls, just like the guy she was married to. No dick, just like the guy she was married to. By the way, we know whose kids those are, not hers. Jefferson's. So, I think it's incredible irony that I'm here this day, and I didn't know till the day, and look what's going on here today. On the 200 there. What a building, what a place. Marie Antoinette, wow. So, she was the last one. Yalta by the sea. Stalin's first words. What Churchill used to poison. Of course, a lot of people think Stalin was poisoned. You know, and so the war between the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and the Prussians, which played out for centuries, that is the Cold War. It is the Cold War because Teller ran the show. Teller ran the show. So that is the Cold War. Now let's think about what's going on today. Putin stands with his military men in line, 40 intermediate rays. Gorbachev was the greatest human rights activist, anti-nuclear. We had a chance. He was amazing. He was amazing what he was able to do. And Reagan was forced up by the people because we were anti-nuclear. We had a real chance. We had a real chance in the 80s. We're not now. So we reverse. So now it's the same thing. Ukraine as 100 years ago, World War I. Right here, the king, Black Hand. So I think it's an incredible irony that the UN's here and the UN is fighting nuclear. So here we have the same war going. The Cold War was nothing but that war because at the end of Teller's life, he said he wanted to put nuclear tips on Star Wars. That was Teller. He said that. I mean, he was still, the Department of Energy runs the United States. And who controls the Department of Energy? The royal family in England. One last, look what happened to all the royals. The last of the Roman Empire was who? Marie Antoinette. They guillotined. They were guillotining 40 people a day, including Maximilian guillotined. He got guillotined. You know, bring back the guillotine. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You know, the House of Windsor, historical sense. It wasn't that long. It was not that long ago. So, Ukraine's at a full-blown out plutonium war. So, this time, it's the same old history. Oh, absolutely. But this time, it's all nuclear. And their weapon, cancer. Stand tuned. What a place.